Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Gail Kurtzman, and I'll be handing it over now to Adele Weinstein. Adele, you can take it away.
Great. Thank you, Gail. Welcome, everyone, to tonight's program, sponsored by Beth Tikvah Women and Musica Beth Tikvah. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Adele Weinstein, and I am the president of Beth Tikvah Women. Tonight's program will be approximately 1 hour in length with a question and answer period at the end. The chat will be monitored, so please type your questions in the chat. We will be recording tonight's program, and please remain on mute. I would like to thank everyone who organized tonight's program, the executive of Beth Tikvah Women, with a special thank you to Gloria Pincus. Thank you to the Musica Beth Tikvah Committee, and especially Chazan Tibi Kavari and Marcia Rosen. Thank you to Gail Kurtzman, Beth Tikvah's events and program coordinator, Ricky Firth, Beth Tikvah's marketing and communications expert, and of course, Reuven Grainer. There is no cost to tonight's program. Donations to Beth Tikvah Women, Musica Beth Tikvah are welcome. Please call the Shul office to make a donation. And without further ado, I'd like to present Gloria Pincus to introduce Reuven Grainer.
Thank you, Adele, and a warm welcome to all of you who are watching us on Zoom or live streaming. It is a privilege and a pleasure to introduce a very talented young man who is our guest artist this evening. If you've watched Kabbalah Shabbat services when Tibi had the Beth Tikvah band, or if you enjoyed the wonderful, talented professional choir who enhanced our high holiday services, you will recognize Reuven, although this time he's not wearing a mask. However, to take a page from Doug, in the interest of openness and transparency, I must reveal that Reuven does not come from Jamaica. In fact, he told me that he comes from North York, where he began formal classical piano lessons at the age of 6. His high school years were at Earl Haig Collegiate for the Arts, and then he continued on his journey by enrolling at the University of Toronto, where he graduated from their elite jazz performing program. There he studied with some great pianists, including David Restivo, Mark Eisenman, and Chuck Donnelly, just to name a few. Reuven is an accomplished pianist, keyboardist, and has a repertoire of many musical styles, including jazz, R&B, classical, Latin, klezmer, electro-style, and pop. He's one of the city's most sought-after keyboardists, sidemen, and is creatively involved in composing and playing with several projects, as well as appearing as the sideman for various local and international artists. Reuven has performed, recorded, and toured as a band leader and sideman extensively through Ontario, the States, Europe, and the Middle East. And now, without further ado, as they say in showbiz, Reuven, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a joy to be here, the miracle that is Zoom. And I have to thank Tibi and Rob so much for helping me with the technology. I have to apologize in advance. This is one of my weaknesses, even though I'm quite young. I'm technologically a little bit illiterate, so I apologize if there's any inconveniences. But yeah, I'm so happy to be here and to give this presentation. This is very personal and a very special one for me. When I was in school, when I was at U of T, I was always looking for information about a Jewish musical influence within jazz, and it was kind of hard to find. It's kind of hard to find for me. I feel like with a lot of the great composers, we're going to be looking at some wonderful examples, some of my personal favorites, Benny Goodman, George Gershwin, as well as a lot of more modern ones as well, living today. And with all these composers, I found a lot of them are, they don't speak about their Jewish musical influences, or specifically with music, with how it influences. Am I supposed to look in? Sorry, this camera? Okay.
Either one.
Okay, thank you. They don't speak about their musical influences explicitly, so that's I I guess, took it upon myself to delve into this and to kind of decipher, find some recordings. We're going to look at them together, and if you were all here, which I wish you were in the physical space, we'd listen to them together and kind of. I'd love to hear your input of how you feel, if it sounds quote unquote Jewish or not. What makes something sound Jewish? And what makes something sound jazz? So without further ado, before we have to start at where is jazz music. So just give a little perspective on that. I'm gonna attempt my first screen share. So I'm gonna want to share this slide here. Okay. Share screen. And I want to share this. Share. Can everyone see that? What is jazz music? Are you seeing that, Rob? Yeah? Okay, perfect, perfect. So just from this first definition, okay, so this is an Oxford, this first definition here, the first quote you see is the Oxford concise official quote unquote definition of jazz music. So jazz is a type of a music of Black American origin characterized by improvisation, syncopation, a regular rhythm, and typically played on brass and woodwind instruments. So it's really tough to define a really evolving style of music like jazz, but even within this definition, I want you to kind of keep this, as we're going to listen to the examples, kind of keep this in the back of your mind of improvisation, syncopation, some kind of rhythmic element, and the instrumentation, brass and woodwind, because you'll see at the beginning of the music we're going to play, all of these can pretty much be applied. So you will hear those elements in the music, I think, pretty explicitly. But in the later examples, you'll see how kind of you can really get away from them, and that they become a springboard to jump off of to new musical styles in terms of maybe a modern jazz, or when you combine more Jewish elements, so there's less of the quote unquote traditional jazz influence. So yeah, this definition does apply to certain things, but it's kind of just the beginning, in my opinion. We're gonna look at some musical examples that'll make more sense of that. Okay, yeah, and jazz is hard to define and has absorbed musical influences from around the globe. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing this now. Okay, wow, I feel accomplished. Great, I did it. Okay, so the next thing I want to look at is the timeline of jazz. So 1890, 1910, jazz is born, and this is what we call the ragtime style, characterized by American nationalism, by military music. You have syncopations. We start to see those kind of rhythms, but they're based on what's called like a 16th note grid. So we have like an oompa rhythm, doom cha doom cha doom. There's offbeats, there's things like that help drive the music and give it that rhythmic excitement that we associate with jazz music, but it's still quite stiff and militaristic in nature. 1910s to 1920, we have blues is quite predominant. 1920s to 30s, we have Dixieland jazz, which some argue is, New Orleans is the birthplace. It's quite debatable, but 1930s to 40s, we have like the golden era, I'd say, of jazz music, which is swing, the big band era. We're going to start looking at examples. Those are the first few examples we're gonna look at. And this is the real big innovation of, well, firstly, with the swing era, it's the first time where jazz music is the popular music, especially in America. It's played on the radio. It's people are dancing to it. It's commercially viable for the first and maybe the last time, unfortunately. But the 1940s was quite a golden era. The 1940s, we have a kind of a quick right turn into like the bebop era. Artists like Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie are paving the way for a more, I don't know, maybe the word intellectual is wrong, but more sophisticated, more art approach to jazz music that has more of intricate melodic structures and contours, more chromaticism, usually quicker tempi, so faster. The music is kind of originated to distance themselves from, they wanted to shy away from the kind of commercial swing era and show more creativity. The 1940s to 50s, we have more of the cool era. A seminal record is Miles Davis' Birth of the Cool. That's a well-known record that shows kind of that era. Think of more neo-noir, think of those kind of film era, those kind of moody jazz pieces. It's kind of, that era is predominant for that, I would say. And then once you get to the 1960s, I'd already call this, we're getting to what's quote unquote modern jazz. And if you, again, you go back to that first Oxford definition of jazz that we were looking at, we're kind of already stepping away from this thing. So we have, for example, what's called free jazz, and it's not free to go to the concerts, unfortunately, but the music is free of rules and regulations. So we're getting away from the musical elements of Western music theory. So things like time signatures, key signatures, all these kind of things are less important to perhaps other elements of music, for example, interaction. So playing with a free jazz ensemble, it's more about the interaction, let's say, between the instruments, or the sonic texture, the sound of the instrument, and the different tones you can explore, the overtone series of the saxophone, rather than all following a grid, a rhythmic and harmonic chord progression or something like that. 60s to 80s, we have fusion, jazz rock. Groups like the recently passed away Chick Corea was with Return to Forever, groups such as this that are kind of combining rock music and new electric instruments, Fender Rhodes for keyboards, electric guitar, Fender electric basses, kind of combining elements of jazz and rock. In my opinion, this is where we kind of first see jazz as a vehicle for integrating other styles of music, at least in the studied sense. And what I'd like to argue as well in this lecture is show that there are Jewish musical influences in styles of jazz, starting from the early eras, like ragtime, like Dixieland, like swing, like big band, which we're going to look at momentarily. So the 60s to 80s, we have fusion, jazz rock. And then I would say kind of, 80s to current, it's like the next, I guess you would call it, artists would call it the postmodern, what comes after modern, mixing of old and new styles, rock, R&B, funk, modern jazz, swing. The term ethno music or world music was kind of coined around the 80s. And this kind of applies to maybe what we're looking at today, the mix of a folkloric music, like maybe klezmora music, klezmer, or a tune like that, and how characteristics of the performance and the composition might be integrated with jazz. Okay, that's a lot of information. So there's many styles of jazz, right? And we're going to look at why jazz particularly could also be an incubator, and it's such a great vehicle for artists to combine musical influences. I'm looking at a slide right now. I'm seeing two groups from Toronto. One combines electronic dance music with jazz. One is Auto Rickshaw, their group from Toronto. They're a wonderful trio. They combine Carnatic music from India with jazz. So they have a tabla player, right, playing the traditional rhythm and syllabic responses. Tibby's doing it with me right now. We got it going. So, and jazz is such a good vehicle for that because of those elements we looked at. And again, referring to the definition, like improvisation, interacting with music, with other musicians on stage and the audience as well. These are really great characteristics of jazz. Okay, so I've been talking a lot so far. It's a lot of information, and I'm trying to get through it because I have so many wonderful musical examples that I want to share with you. And like this first one, so I want to play this wonderful clip. Actually, you know what? Yeah, let me, good idea. Thank you, Tibby. I'm going to share my screen. I was going to play a video first, but I want to start with just an audio clip. And I'm going to share my screen so you can read the slide as well. Okay, so share screen. Okay, so you hopefully can all see that. And I'm going to play the clip, so hopefully you can all hear as well. done. Okay. Stop share. Okay, great, wonderful. So hopefully you all heard that. That's a wonderful tune from 1938, I believe. Who'll buy my bublitzy, my bagels? Bublitschki, thank you, my bagels. The first time I heard this recording was this version of Benny Goodman and his orchestra performing it. And I remember hearing this, and the first thing I can think of, speaking of, again, genres of music, jazz, that's not the kind of the first thing that came to mind to me. I'm thinking of klezmer music. And hopefully you heard it. Hopefully at this point, if we were all together, this is where I would love to open it up, but hopefully we'll have time to talk at the end and just ask you for what you think. What elements of that sounded quote unquote Jewish, or more specifically in this example, klezmer like. So in my opinion, the performance that Benny is giving on the clarinet it's absolutely just one. You can't even argue that, to me, that it is not influenced by klezmer music. He's absolutely embraced the tradition, listened to it. He might not admit it. He might not speak about it openly. I couldn't find any resources of that, but you can hear it, and you can hear the inflections. Specifically, there's a lot of techniques specific to the clarinet that he employs that are similar to a yearning sound or a vocal sound, which is desired in klezmer music. Often, the lead instruments of the klezmer would often be clarinet or fiddle, or the voice. And those instruments would mimic what a chazan would do. The inflections, the yearning, the glissandos, they're specific more to a klezmer style versus a Western European clarinet style, which would be, the vibrato would be a bit more perhaps present, or done in a quite a specific way. It's hard to, these are things that are hard to talk about, but I think once you hear it, you hear, Tibi was actually listening to this earlier today, and he was saying you can hear the Jewish soul, and I couldn't agree more. It's almost just evident of the klezmer, the Jewish soul, but more specifically the klezmer style. So Benny specifically, he had his beginnings of clarinet lessons at a local shul in Chicago, which is where he's from. Which is pretty evident. He was quite a virtuoso. At the age of 10, he was virtuosic and was already performing. And I think from an early age, there were some earlier recordings I could find. He was more, I would say, of the jazz or blues style. And what I mean by that, if I have time, I actually might play another clip from him. And you hear blues inflections. So maybe I'll play later. But there are certain notes of the scale, the way you would bend notes on the third degree, on the flat fifth, inflections that a guitarist or, again, a vocalist would do that make it sound yearning or expressive, for lack of a better word, perhaps a melancholic quality to it. And this is kind of a similarity with the klezmer music as well as with blues music. They are in different modes, different scales, but they might achieve a similar quality. I'm going to go to the piano really quick, and I'm just going to maybe show a couple of these modal differences, but show the characteristics that are similar between those two styles. Should I take this mic, Rob? Should I just walk over? Sure. Should I take it? Okay. I'll take it for you. Sure. Okay. Thanks. Okay. Thanks. So we might have. So this would be like what would be called a blues scale. Right, so we have a few important notes on this. We have the tonic or the root, the flat third, the fourth, and then the flat fifth. So these kind of altered notes, comparing it to a minor scale, so on piano it's a little harder to demonstrate. I'm going to look into this camera. Okay. On the piano, it's a little harder to demonstrate because we have the octave divided by 12 equal semitones, whereas all these inflections are happening between a semitone. So between these kind of two notes, we would have all those, the colors of those inflections. We would have that's the benefit of what a clarinet, for example, could do, or a fiddle can do with a string, clarinet with the voice, with the breath, or a singer can do. But on the piano we're limited. But in any case, we would play the scale, and you can kind of hear there's that yearning quality, right? The idea of tension and release, perhaps. Now let's supplement that. Let's go to a mode that would be more familiar with klezmer or Jewish music. So we call this the Phrygish mode because it's based on a roughly a Phrygian scale, which is the third mode in Western music. But essentially a lot of music theory, but essentially all you need to hear is that there's the same kind of tension and pull between these two scales. So we have what's called the tonic, which is our home. That's where we want to arrive. So in this scale, here's the blues scale. I'll play it in the same key. So we want to arrive there, and same with our Jewish scale, our Phrygish scale. We still, the destination is the same. The only difference is slightly how we're arriving there. You can look at it that way. Our tonic, we both want to, we have the same philosophy that we want to arrive home. We want to resolve a cadence. We want a point of resolution. But the way we're doing that are with slightly different tension notes. But where the similarity is, which is kind of difficult to demonstrate on piano, as I was saying, is the inflection and the vocabulary, the nuance that a musician would do to outline a style. The way you would play a blues would be very different from a quote-unquote Jewish cadence, or that Phrygian cadence, the Phrygish cadence. So just a really cool similarity I just wanted to point out. And that's, I think, something Benny was very well aware of when he was young, is this kind of idea. He was incorporating, what I want you to listen for in this next clip, I'm excited to play it, is blues vocabulary and blues inflections. Think of that. This is actually the exact line he plays in the opening of the solo of the next song we're going to hear.
I can hear him in the background.
So it's so simple. It's only 3 notes. We're going to listen to that. That's the starting motif of his improvisation. And those notes both belong in both those modal scales, right? The blues, and then actually a Jewish mode, not the Phrygish mode, but another Jewish common cantorial mode. Right, so both of those are kind of similar. And again, these are kind of things he's not, when a musician's improvising, they're not thinking about all these things. He's not thinking, I'm borrowing this Jewish device or this blues device, what's similar about them? But you internalize these music. So he's heard cantors perform, he's heard klezmer music, 100%, and he's absorbed that into his musical palette. Okay, so we're gonna head over to the laptop and we're gonna play another song. Okay. Thanks, Tippy. Okay, so I want to share screen to the YouTube video, right? Share screen. Which one's YouTube? Oh, this one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I want to play this one. Perfect. Okay, and can they hear me as well?
Yeah.
Okay, you can hear me, perfect. So I'm gonna make this full screen. This is from a film from 1937 called Hollywood Hotel. And I love these old films because they're like almost like seem like they did these kind of things in one take. They're amazing. So it's a performance by Benny Goodman's orchestra. The tune, it's a well-known song in the jazz idiom called Sing, Sing, Sing. It's a well-known big band song, something you might play. If you play in a big band, this might be one of the earlier repertoire pieces. It's kind of a staple, has a signature kind of breakdown drum section. But anyways, I don't want to talk too much about it because I'd love for you to listen to it. But with the mindset of just kind of what I was talking about, listen to, I guess particularly I alluded to his motif that Benny starts his solo about halfway through this piece. But listen to the blues inflection, listen to the klezmer inflection, vocabulary. Think of what might be similar from a klezmorim clarinetist as to what Benny is doing in this jazz context. Okay, here we go.
I started making videos for social media because I felt like there was another story that could.
Okay, there we go. So there were some questions about who the drummer was. That's Gene Krupa. Yeah, he's wonderful, right? So entertaining, so engaging. He's a beast, as I'd say. So entertaining and energetic and very accurate. Okay, so I want to go back to my slideshow. Okay, great, got it. So yeah, so just looking at that piece again, this is a moment. I wish you were all here with me. We would talk about the music and what's happening there. But I hope you caught that kind of motif that I was outlining, that he's kind of started the improvisation with, embellishments that he's playing. Maybe I'll play it later in a moment, but these kind of arpeggios, which are kind of long broken chords, da 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 da, to those diminished seventh arpeggios. That's something you would hear a cantor, like Tibby do all the time when they're embellishing a melody. They're going to outline harmony. And why is he doing something like this? Well, you notice Gene Krupa. Well, there's mainly drums. It's a very percussive piece, right? There's a lot of that kind of tribalist percussive element. There's not a lot of harmony, and if there is, it's in music we call it like unison or stripped down harmony, something simpler where there's just a lot of emphasis on melody, or the horns are doubled. You'd have the trumpet playing the same note as the saxophone, so we call unison, playing the same melody. And so when it's Benny solo, it's just drums and clarinet. So he's responsible for being the melodic instrument, rhythm as well, but the harmony as well. He has to outline the harmony. So when he's playing those that I alluded to, that diminished seventh arpeggio, when he's playing those, because there's no harmony, there's no piano behind it, right? There's no orchestra playing. He has to outline the harmony. That's what a cantor does. When a cantor is singing, they're singing the melody. They're hopefully doing a great job, and then they and they sing those arpeggios to outline the harmony, to outline changes of harmony. It's too much work to go back there. Maybe later I'll play it after. But when you're playing these kind of chords, there's different ways. Melody is responsible for harmony as well, is what I'm getting at. So that's something Benny's doing. This is something very, very attuned to klezmer as well. In a klezmer ensemble, you might have a lot of what I call oompa oompa rhythms. So you'll have, sorry, am I looking into this? Either one. Sorry. You'd have what I call those oompa oompa rhythms. So bass harmony, boom cha, that's kind of the skeleton, or what we call the clave in Latin music, the core, the key of the rhythmic foundation, and then that is what you build on for a lot of klezmora music. And so when you have something like that, because the articulation, the articulation is so short, when you have short da da, when you have something like that versus pa pa, see already the second one, you're hearing more pitch. There's more pitch there. So music that has more shorter articulation, music like klezmer, like jazz, a piece like Sing Sing Sing, with this arrangement in this context, you'll have less harmony. So it's the soloist's responsibility, especially. It's very much a soloist, just him and drums, Gene, right? So he's got to outline that harmony. So he's taking that, in my opinion, that comes from a lot from the klezmer style, that kind of mentality of you're outlining the harmony as a soloist, you're outlining melody. And again, going back to the example, Who Will Buy My Bublichki, as well as actually that would be the year after this, he recorded it. I hear that inflection, all the klezmer, na 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 na. Oh, I can barely imitate it, but the falling quality, the yearning, almost spoken, sighing, a lot of this harmonic vocabulary, a lot of the note choices, the tonic minor sixth chord, the 5 dominant seventh chord. Anyways, that's boring stuff. But basically outlining this kind of this harmony that might be more. I think this harmony is more typical of klezmer, I'd say, than a jazz context. I think it's leaning more towards that, more of a Jewish influence. Yeah, amazing piece. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen one more time. And I want this. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. So we looked at a lot at Jewish musical influence for like from a musician's perspective, how inflection, how timbre, how note choices might influence improvisation, elements of jazz like that. But how about composition? That's kind of another avenue. So I want to highlight on the slide that I just chose two great Jewish jazz composers, George Gershwin, Irving Berlin. I can list tons and tons and tons of pieces that showcase their prowess, but really I just listed a three just to show what I think are some very much ones influenced by Jewish musical influences. So the ones I have for George Gershwin, I wrote It Ain't Necessarily So, Summertime, What'll I Do? Again, it's too much work maybe. Should I do it? Okay, we're gonna go to the piano just super briefly. You got it? Okay. Okay. Stop share. I'm gonna go back into it briefly. Okay. Thank you. So yeah. So the pieces I was looking at, this camera, thank you. So actually since I'm at the piano now, we already did the move, the schlep. I'm gonna mention, kind of demonstrate what I was talking about with the 1-5-1 harmony, the way Benny was outlining it. So if here's our tonic, our home minor chord, there's just drums, right? So there's none of that harmony happening. So that's a line from Benny Goodman's solo in Sing, Sing, Sing. So just with that melody, with no chords, right? I'm not playing my left hand if I was playing piano. If I were to accompany this, you would play. This is all the tonic chord, right? But then once he's here, right? So this just with the melody alone, you're hearing these harmonic movements. So that's what I was trying to explain. Is melody so powerful because melody can inform harmony, and this device, melody informing harmony, is. I would say that's a very big trait of klezmer and this kind of jazz music, and it's fundamental in this piece like this. I think it's easier to hear again because the band was dropped out. So that's something I wanted to mention. But the point we're talking about now, we're talking about composition. So songs like "What'll I Do" by Irving Berlin. Okay. Beautiful, simple melody. I hear lots of Jewish influence in that. I hope you can too. For example, one thing that sounds very, very Jewish to me about this melody. So playing what the term of this is modal mixture, combining different modes. This comes straight from Cantor 101. So if we're in the key of D major in this case, normally you would have this chord sequence. You'd have the 1, D major, G major, A major, D. That's a 1-4-5, a very common cadence in a lot of Western classical music from 1700s to present. So, okay. So when we're borrowing different harmony from a different key, in this case, the parallel minor of D minor, or the subdominant minor, which is G minor, the 4th degree of D major, we're calling that that's what I'm calling modal mixture. You're mixing modal elements, you're borrowing harmony from a closely related key. And it sounds something more like this. So you see that second chord, that G major, instead of major, I played minor, the more mellow version. And you can do this with anything. So with a lot of chazanut melodies, you might have something like, then perhaps major, minor, 5 minor, so a modulation is a term for a key change. So what I just did there, I'm changing key. This, to me, that sounds very, very Jewish. It sounds like it's following, I would call it through composed, which is a sense that the music is evolving and taking turns, like the music is meant for. It's meant for prayer. It's meant to follow a text. The text comes first, right? And the music should follow that. It's not written the other way around. And to me, What'll I Do, for example, by Irving Berlin, is a song written in this through composed fashion. The melody's just taking all these turns. Here's the turn. There's a different turn. And now it's falling, rising, falling. It's almost unpredictable in a way, but yet so predictable. It's kind of brilliant. Fun fact, by the way, Irving Berlin could only play piano in one key. He could only play, I think, in G flat major. That's why all his melodies are so simple. And he had to build a crank on his acoustic piano to play in different keys. It's a really interesting fact. But anyways, so here we're hearing that modal mixture in this melody alone. Da, 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 da. Here's the D major. Here's the surprise chord, the 4 minor. Back to major, major. Right. So just in those first bar or two, we're hearing that kind of element of melody going different places, borrowing different chords from different keys. I can get really into depth with this, but I'm sure if you hear the songs, you can, with kind of this lens of, are there Jewish elements in these Jewish composers composing these jazz pieces? I think you can maybe start to see these patterns and see resemblances in this way. The one, I'm going to go away from the piano for now, and I want to show you a really cool MP3 I found of someone taking the tune It Ain't Necessarily So by George Gershwin and jazzifying it and kind of seeing where it comes from melodically. It's going to be pretty cool. Okay. Let's share my screen. Wonderful. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen now. So here, I'm going to play this clip, and it's going to segue from what I believe is the source Jewish prayer to It Ain't Necessarily So by George Gershwin. And I'm pretty sure, again, with this influence, it was so hard to find resources because Gershwin's not writing about it. I feel like a lot of ethnomusicologists aren't writing about the specific thing. It's not often documented, but I'm sure if you listen to it, you will hear a lot of similarity, whether it was intentional or not. But again, I'm sure these composers have absorbed lots of Jewish music, and it's coming out in their composition, whether they're aware of it or not.
2, 3. One, two, letter A.
Exactly. Okay, so hopefully you all heard that. Right, it's almost uncanny how similar the two melodies are. they're slightly different. I won't show on the piano, but ba da 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 ba ba ah. The slight editing, the George Gershwin has the second demonstration. Pardon my lousy singing, but the second version is more chromatic. It has those kind of 12 semitone engaged notes that were on the piano that kind of give it that klezmer Jewish / blues like inflection, the yearning quality that's kind of similar between all these things. But the melody's almost the same, right? What was the difference between the prayer and the music, right? It's those jazz elements, which were the steady rhythm that we looked at. Remember the first definition, the steady rhythm, syncopation in the rhythm, which that's kind of the really African influence of jazz music is polyrhythmic or triplet-based rhythms. That's really sub-Saharan African based. The steady rhythm, the tempo, the instrumentation, right? So having a woodwind instrument playing the melody, a clarinet or a trumpet, I don't remember what was on the recording. Having like a classic jazz piano trio rhythm section. You have a drum kit, it's a modern instrument, an upright bass, piano, or a chordal instrument like a guitar. The instruments, of course, make up a big factor, the instrument you're hearing. But it's once you have that, you went speed 100 from Jewish to jazz. Yeah, it's fascinating to me. Okay, so I can't believe it's already 8:20. We were talking with Tibby and Rob. I have so much more that I have to skip, so I'd love to do a part 2 sometime if we can. But I'm just gonna kind of try to plow through a few of these next points so we can get to something a bit more modern with the time we have left. So I'm just looking. I have a few slides of. There's so many great Jewish jazz artists: Stan Getz, Willie the Lion Smith, Mel Torme, Lee Konitz, John Zorn, Amy Winehouse, Mo Kaufman. I have lists and lists and lists of great Jewish jazz musicians. I'm sure you can add so many more. There's so many, and it's amazing that I'm sure with so many of them, and even non-Jewish jazz musicians, there's so much to be discovered with the Jewish musical influence in their composition and their playing. Okay, so what I want to talk about are some living musicians. Because that's another thing that I think often gets, we often, academia sort of usually follows musicians and composers that are great but have passed away or of a past tradition. But I think it's really important to see the music that's happening today. And I mean that, like, actually this week I was finding music that came out last week that I have for you for today. So I always want to try to find something fresh. So let's talk a little bit about the Israeli jazz scene today, for example. There's so much going on. There's so many prominent musicians. There's actually 2 Avishai Cohen musicians that are very notable and have won many awards. We're going to listen to one of them, the bass player. A lot of them, there's kind of the Israeli New York corridors, what the jazz musicians called it in the early 2000s, 90s. You have waves of Israeli jazz musicians coming to New York, studying or going to colleges like Berkeley College, which is known well for music, or playing at Smalls Club in New York, and kind of being part of this vibrant scene. And of course, like all people, we all have our own influences, musically or otherwise, and you almost can't forget that. You bring that with you. So it's amazing to hear their early music and hear that. But when I feel like most artists, almost usually a great artist will find themselves as they get older or find more of their unique voice. That's why I have some new examples of composers such as Avishai Cohen, for example, who combines really, really beautiful, interesting folkloric Jewish musical elements with and Middle Eastern sounds with a jazz funk idiom. So before I'll play one clip. I'll just talk briefly about Avishai Cohen if you don't know him. He moved to New York in 1991 to study in the New School of Music. He established a relationship with Chick Corea in 1997, who just recently passed away. It kind of uplifted him in his career in a certain ways. They were booked him for a few shows. He was already playing with big name jazz musicians at that time in New York City. So he moved back to Israel in 2005, but he still plays in New York and around the world. So we're going to play one clip. So here's I'm going to play something from 2006. I'm going to share my screen one more time. Okay, hopefully you can see that. So this is a piece called Nunu by Avishai Cohen. I won't read what's on the screen because you can, as you listen, don't want to take too much time, but I'm going to play this clip. What I want you to listen to, to pay attention, what elements of this are Jewish / Middle Eastern sounding and would be different from a jazz context, because I think you'll hear that it would be called jazz music again because of maybe those definitions we looked at earlier. But if you're looking at those earlier definitions like syncopation, rhythm, played on woodwind and brass instruments, there's no woodwind brass instruments here. So we're kind of, we've kind of gone straight from, I think, that original definition. But yeah, without further ado, let's play this beautiful piece. Okay. Isn't that amazing? So we were just talking about it. And Tibby was saying that, yeah, it's we've kind of left the klezmer and gone to the Middle East. That's the Jewish connection there. It's so true. It's the it's the Middle Eastern side of it. So like a whole other element of Jewish influence and of a more folkloric kind of musical influence. But there's, I think, with a piece like this, the influence really, really. I'm not screen shared, by the way, right? I'm okay. Perfect. There's a lot of influences. So again, I would love. Maybe we'll talk momentarily. We're just about at time, so I'd love to hear your input about this piece and all the others. But there's so many influences. So right from the beginning, it's like almost a Western classical piece. You have a motif in the bass, you have counter melodies, you have like a symphonic structure. It starts and ends almost the same. It's almost like overture like, you know, they're introducing a subject matter, ending with a subject matter, parts in unison. So if any musicians are playing melodies together, that means it's not improvised, right? It means it's composed. So if we're looking at jazz music, a lot of the synonym with people say jazz is synonymous with making it up as you go or improvising, but that it's not necessarily always true. Like in this case, right? There's a compositional element, or in a lot of jazz music, we call it the head, which is where you'd play the melody, and then you would improvise or embellish the melody or and play along the structure of those chord changes. This is a little bit different because it's almost through composed into sections. We have an intro section, we have a new section. Then if you caught in the middle, that amazing pianist Sam Barsh starts with an ostinato, a pattern in an odd time signature that feels very folk-like. Right, and he's playing this kind of rhythm, and it's an ostinato, by the way, is a term for a repeated motif, usually a rhythmic one. So he's playing this kind of motif on, and the other instruments kind of join, almost like a gang style, very very folk-like or klezmer-like, I would think, or reminiscent of many other folk musics. But the key is that it's also composed, right? It's organized in sections. That's very classical or thought out. Then there's improvised section. We had a question Rob was mentioning of what is an oud? That was the pear-shaped stringed instrument, which is, as soon as you hear that, I think it's very emblematic of Middle Eastern musics. And the reason why, it's the only instrument of this compared to the piano or a Western instrument that can play those quarter tones, those notes that are not equally divisive within an octave. So that already gives you an entryway to, if you want to play a Turkish makam, you can play in a mode that doesn't exist on a piano or a Western guitar, right? You can play within those semitones. There's a lot to be explored there. So kind of having a Western instrument unfortunately locks you out of playing a lot of ethnic musics. But look at an example. This is a great example of how that's not true, because you have a piano and a bass and a drum kit and an oud all working together, right? And with a different kind of style composition, with kind of Jewish elements in the phrasing, Middle Eastern elements of music, with classical elements, with jazz, with rhythm, with odd time signatures. It's kind of it's like a melting pot of culture. There's just so much. It's so vibrant when I hear this music. It's so full of life and energy and so creative to me too. So we're already over time. So I have tons more musical examples I unfortunately won't get to today. But I want to thank you so much for listening. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy to share this information. I'm so passionate about this. And I love listening. I'm so happy to listen to the same amazing. If anything, I hope you enjoyed some beautiful music, if not anything more. And I have one of my favorite composers, as Ryuichi Sakamoto, is a Japanese film composer. And he has I love this quote just to tie everything together. I'm going to read for you. Asian music heavily influenced Debussy, and Debussy heavily influenced me. So the music goes around the world and comes full circle. So that's all for today. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I would love to open the floor for questions.
Reuven, it's
like
Marcia
that would be great.
Rosen, and I have the
One moment,
pleasure
okay.
of, first of all, thanking you so much for what an exciting and enthusiastic presentation. First of all, I'd like to say that we're glad that we were part of your
Can you read them here?
techie initiation tonight. You did very well. And your enthusiasm for the topic is absolutely contagious. Your examples have been fabulous, the way you've shown us exactly what you're getting at. And it's been an absolute delight. Avishai Cohen, this Israeli jazz person, is new to me, so I thank you for that. And Alan says that he's very much aware of him, and that apparently he plays piano as well as he plays the double bass. So everybody's been so enthusiastic with their comments and their thanks and everything. First question I have is, do you have any recordings available? Not necessarily of jazz, of course, but we know how talented you are. We've been blessed with your attendance at the show for Kabbalah and for the high holidays. So if you do have any CDs you want to share, if you could give Gail your link, then she could pass it on to the others. Barry has said that klezmer is not necessarily a Jewish. The first performers at a Jewish wedding were not usually Jewish performers. So the enthusiasm, as I say, that's been coming through tonight is absolutely phenomenal. Do you have anything you want to comment over some of the messages that you've seen, aside from all the thank yous that are coming through loud and clear?
It warms my heart to hear that. That's so nice. Thank you. Thank you. I'm so glad you enjoyed. Yeah, in regard to klezmer musicians not being Jewish, yeah, absolutely. It didn't start that way. Sorry. Okay. Thanks, Tibby. I'm just hearing myself. Thank you so much. Absolutely, yeah. So one thing I didn't have as much time to get into, and I would love to have open for discussion, is what I was talking a bit more maybe on the jazz side, but what makes Jewish music Jewish? So that's the whole other element. So like we're saying, the Middle Eastern style of Jewish elements, the cantorial embellishments. I think that's maybe the core of what I was getting at, because a lot of the klezmer music, in my opinion, the melodic structure, I was talking a little bit about through composed elements, the way that melodies don't follow necessarily a form, they follow text, they're through composed. Those elements that are also existent in klezmerim are there in the music. So in fact, it's even deeper than the klezmer. It's cantorial, which goes way farther back, right? So that could be one point. And what was another point that was mentioned? Sorry, can I see these comments?
Well, a lot of thank yous. But I agree
I
with you.
remember someone was mentioning about Avishai Cohen. I'm so glad.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you
I'm so
did
glad. Yeah, I
actually
didn't know
heard
he
a
was a piano
concert.
player as well. That's amazing. I'm not surprised because he's such an amazing musician. I had the pleasure of hearing him play live at the Rex with Amos Hoffman, the oud player who was there. It was amazing.
Wow.
Okay,
and
I'm reading these
you do
comments.
have a lot of other topics in your back pocket. I can tell. So on behalf of and we're not finished yet, but I do want to thank you on behalf of Beth Tikvah Women and Music of Beth Tikvah for sharing your talents with us tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure. And if there aren't any more comments, I'd like to ask Adele to come back on board. And everybody, thanks for attending tonight. Here's Adele.
Thank you, Marcia. This was a wonderful, wonderful evening. And I want to thank our Hazan, Tibi, Kavari, and Reuven, and everyone who helped put this together. As I mentioned, Gail Kurtzman and Ricky Firth and everyone. And it was so nice to see so many people participating tonight and watching the show. And thank you again. And we'll get together again very soon. Have a good evening, everyone.
I also want to just say one last shout out to Rob as well, who's doing all the tech for today, making it possible. And of course, Tibby. And thank you so much for having me. Thank you for being here and listening. And I love these questions. Hopefully one day we'll be able to do this in a room and have that kind of response. But thank you, Rob, Tibby. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure. Have a great night.